Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is David Schaefer. I'm with the U.S. Department of State's Overseas Buildings Operations, actually the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations, so you may hear us say OBO a little bit. I never understood why it isn't BOBO since it's the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations, but being BOBO may be a little bit too close to home. With me today is Todd Evans, also with the Department of State, and Bob Griffin with Lockheed Martin. What we're going to be talking about today is some strategies that we've used in order to be able to incorporate renewables into our facilities overseas. As with most of the GBC things going on today, it is a course, you are getting credit for this, so we're going to be trying to tell you who we are, what we're doing, and what the Department of State is doing, as well as how we're being able to accomplish this, not only through the construction, but also the financing. So what is an embassy? So if you've traveled overseas, you may have come into situations where you need help. And one of the primary effects for the embassies overseas is to help Americans that are abroad. So if you lose your passport, you need to get your passport replaced. If you have to have someone wire you some money because you've lost yours, that's part of our primary services for American citizens. But we also provide visas for foreign travelers that are coming to the U.S., either to vacation or to work. We are there 24/7, 365. It's sovereign land, so it is the United States outside of the United States. So when you go walk through the gates of the facility, you're actually on U.S. soil. It may not look like U.S. soil, but it is U.S. soil. We have embassies and consulates. Embassies are typically buildings that are located in the capital cities of the countries, where we're closely interacting with the local governments and with the people of the city. The consulates are located in smaller cities around the country. So, for example, we have a large country of Italy. We have the embassy is in Rome, and there's consulates in Florence and Milan and Naples to provide services as well as to deal with the local jurisdictions that are there. We are 24/7, 365, so we must be able to operate at all time at full capacity. And we're also a platform for the federal government overseas. So we offer building space, office space, and workspaces for all the federal agencies that are here in DC, supplanted in those countries overseas to support our mission and the federal government's mission moving forward. Like I said, we're just about everywhere. We're in every single climate zone in the country. We're at just about every elevation, including a couple that are questionable for sea level. We have 275 total missions, which is comprised of 169 embassies. We have the 76 consulate generals, which are housed a consulate general individual that is dealing with something very specific to that city. We have 15 consulates, which again have the American Citizen Services and visa processing. U.S. interests, which are small offices, and branch offices. We also have missions that deal with other organizations throughout the world, like the UN in Brussels, OECD in Paris. We have ambassadors to those missions, so they need a location to stay. Within OBO, Department of State, we manage 70 million square feet of facilities, both owned and leased. 43 million of it is in fact leased, which we're not a big player in the realm of building size, but we have nothing from our department within the Department of State. We have nothing that is domestic, nothing in the United States. So if we need to see something, no matter what, we're getting on a plane to go see it. One thing that we're really keen on in our facilities is security. And security has actually been a very significant driving force for us. A lot since the Dar es Salaam bombings in 1998, which kind of set the current path for our program moving forward, and that is the capital program, which we get money from Congress, from all the agencies that we share our space with, to build new safe embassies, which means that we're spending roughly $100 million to $1 billion per facility, not only to house our folks overseas, but to house them safely and to provide a facility that they can operate in, 24/7 full backup generation. We can be completely off-grid because there are a lot of places we are off-grid. But security is a very important factor and something that we've been taking into consideration whenever we're doing the projects that we do for energy efficiency and renewable, because there is such a thing as energy security. We need to be able to operate less expensively and for longer with what we have, and by doing energy efficiencies, and as we'll talk about renewables, we're able to extend those times as we move forward. And something else that we do while we're there in these countries is also provide support. So in situations where there are civil unrest, coups and wars, things like that, we do provide support not only to the local government, local militaries, but also we're a lot of times a platform for our own military doing endeavors in those countries. We support with public health. So West Africa, during the Ebola outbreak, a lot of the resources that went to West Africa came through the embassies in Monrovia and in Guinea. And we also support on natural disasters. So something that we've been building for a long time are facilities that are safe and secure, but that's also safe for the environment. So whenever we had the large earthquakes in Haiti and in Nepal, our buildings were some of the only ones that were still standing, and we actually use them as a platform to be able to provide support and resources to the country, to the people, in order to help them overcome the tragedies that they've just experienced. But we do have some other issues. So within the Department of State, OBO, we are currently managing about $5.6 billion of construction overseas in our capital security program, and there's some challenges in managing construction overseas. There's challenges in managing construction anywhere. We see a lot of issues with local support. Typically when we get to a country, the average education level of a worker is about the 6th grade level in the US. So it's very difficult to find skilled trades. It's very difficult to find folks that actually can perform to the level that we need for the installations and for the capacity that we need. But also we have to add on to that the level of security. Every single person that comes through that site has to be vetted and cleared and background checked and researched. It's very difficult just to get people on site, let alone being able to do the work. So that's something that's been challenging for us to overcome on the energy side, is to be able to do projects that self-fund or have a short payback given the constraints that we have within the world that we work in. We do have a lot of things that are giving us reason for what we do. Obviously we do have the reducing carbon emissions, we have the energy efficiency, we have the financial benefit of doing energy projects and doing renewables, but there's so much more that go along with that. I'm going to turn this over to Todd, and he's going to go through a few of those for us.
Hello, I'm Todd Evans. I'm an architect with OBO. Sorry if we throw a lot of acronyms at you, just catch us later. So why is the State Department getting involved in doing energy efficient LEED buildings overseas? Go through a few of the reasons. So I won't read the full State Department mission statement, but part of it is to support stability abroad. So if we come in and we draw a lot of energy and water resources, that doesn't really help stability, right? So we try to apply the big overarching State Department mission statement into our building design, from energy efficiency and energy and water resource use. And that's further reinforced by the strategic plan that Undersecretary Kennedy signed last year. We also have laws making us do this, right? We move pretty glacially, but we just got on ASHRAE 2010 this July. But there is codes that we comply to make us more energy efficient in our buildings. And then there's a lot of overlapping and conflicting laws about how much renewable energy our buildings are supposed to use. But this is the most recent. It was an executive order signed this year. And you can see there's a sliding scale. Every year we're supposed to be more and more, using more and more renewable energies at our posts. For the longest time, use of renewable energies at our buildings used to be an opt-in, like prove to me why I should be doing this. It's kind of made a shift to the point where prove to me why we shouldn't be doing it. So we may not put renewables in every location, depending on financial or maintenance factors or something else, but for the most part, it's built in. So this is another reason, cost. I know I'm going to get a bunch of eye rolls saying, yeah, I can make renewables work if my costs were 65 cents a kilowatt hour, but I'll get to some of that later. So this is sort of the range of, go forward again. This is sort of a range of our electricity bills around the world. So this is a scan of our electric bill in Djibouti, and because we're the government, we got to redact things, right? But 52 Djiboutian francs works out to about 29 cents a kilowatt hour. And we see this all over the world. Some places are cheap, some places are expensive. In addition to that, we have to have diesel generation on site. Part of our laws and codes that our buildings have to be 24/7, 365. We have to be able to run no matter what. So every post will have on-site diesel generation. And we estimate we're paying 60 to 80 cents a kilowatt hour for our own diesel-generated electricity. And in a lot of countries, even if we're getting an electric bill from a local utility, it doesn't tell the whole story. We might not be able to get all our electric from that utility. Beirut has blackouts twice a day. Some countries, you may get a bill once a year, right? So economics is a big driver towards us doing all our renewables. I'm going to hand it off to Dave here, but right now we have 16 operational systems, 14 more under construction, and we have a ton more that are unfunded that we think would work economically.
Okay, so as I was kind of talking about earlier, we have three methods what we use in order to be able to get projects funded. We have our renovation improvement program, which we get roughly about $3 million a year, so it ends up being about one project a year that we're able to do through the renovation improvement program. We have the capital program, which I talked about earlier, which is roughly a $2.4 billion a year appropriation from Congress to build safe, secure facilities. With that, we've been able to do a significant amount of improvement in the standards that we can maintain for those buildings to be able to get the energy efficiency. And as Todd mentioned, we're now an opt-out for renewables rather than an opt-in. So we have to actually prove that it's not going to work rather than the other way around of proving that it will work. And our last method that we've been using, and we've been using to success, and Bob will get into some of this at the end, is performance contracting, energy savings performance contracting, and being able to self-finance some of these facilities in order to get the renewables and the energy efficiency in. I'm going to walk through the map here, and I'll go slow as it zooms in and out for some case studies on systems that we have completed. Our first one is our first one that we performed back in 2007. This is at the mission in Geneva, Switzerland. This one we actually were able to get a subsidy from the local government of, it's not on there, okay, he took it off. 82 cents a kilowatt hour is what the local utility is actually purchasing the energy back from us from the renewables. And we got a $200,000 bonus, just a grant in order to perform this. We need it because it's actually building integrated solar. So the building integrated solar is the most expensive type of solar you can install. So in order to be able to, even though we're getting 85 cents a kilowatt hour, and we got the grant, we're still looking at more than a 14-year payback because of the cost of doing business and because of how new the technology was to us back in 2007, since we had not really done a project like this before, and the difficulty in doing construction. Again, the security required to do this construction is a little bit more than doing something in the United States where you have a contractor that can come and go. So this is a project that was part of our capital program. This is in Dakar, Senegal. This is a 300 kilowatt system that was incorporated into the construction of the new embassy in Dakar. Currently we are on prime power, which means that we're running our generators 24/7 to keep the facility running. So any kind of energy efficiency that we had built in and renewables that we had built in had helped to reduce that load on the facilities and on the bottom line, because we're paying for diesel fuel to be trucked in on a fairly regular basis just to keep the facility running. We will be connecting, so this is something else, something we find a lot. If you build it, they will come. So we go talk to the utility and we say, we're going to build this big building and we need 2-3 megawatts worth of power, and they kind of look at us sideways and say, well, you can't do that. Well, several years after we build it, they all of a sudden see a nice client there, and then, oh, well, we can give you power. So this is one of the ones that we're actually going to be transitioning into utility, which even with the utility transition, we'll still see a 10-year payback on this system. Back out. And back into Bujumbura. So this is Bujumbura, this is Central Africa. This is a very good project because we looked beyond just the renewables and the energy efficiency, and we looked at tuning the building to be able to use those renewables and energy efficiency features. So this actually, we took the generator plant, because we're again on prime power, we're running generators 24/7, and we made the generators smaller, stretched them out, and paralleled them so that it's demand response. So as the load increases, the generators come online, and as it decreases or as we improve in production, they come offline. So it's very good on a prime rated system that if you can turn off a generator, if you can turn off that generator, you're saving all of that fuel. Going from 80% to 70% efficiency or reducing the load by 10% really doesn't do you a whole lot when you're talking about running big generators. But if you can turn one off, you get significant savings. Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, this again, part of our capital program and another example of where we started off at prime power. Once we were operating for a couple of years, the utility said, hey, there's a big cash cow, the federal government, they got deep pockets, let's connect them to utility and start collecting on them. But that's representative of this 30 cents a kilowatt hour, so that's a blended rate between our generation for the first couple of years to the utility connection that we're expecting within the next year or so. And here's one that we have under construction currently. This is in Nouakchott, Mauritania. This is West Africa. This is a 21st century facility that will be put into a 16th century country. So this is going to be the most advanced building in the country. This is probably going to be one of the ones that we have which is LEED certified, which will be the first LEED certified building in the country. But we have here not only the 184 kilowatt of photovoltaics on the covered parking, but also we have a wind turbine that's going in that we'll talk about in a little bit. But looking at this, something that we try to do is to stay off of roofs. Roofs become a great concern with maintenance. And when we're talking about these locations, they're flat roofs, there's a lot of harsh environments that we deal with. So what we do is we try to look for locations that we can do dual business. So what we do is we do a lot of renewables on covered parking, so that not only helps us with covering the parking, which we have a requirement to cover the parking, but also helps our staff because their cars are covered in a location where it frequently gets over 100 degrees and the sun's hot, and this is a fantastic environment to work in. But we take those benefits and those partnerships in these types of systems, be able to really advance the renewables and provide more than just an energy benefit to the system. As you can see here, we have three different colors. We have the blue, which we've been talking about, the planned or the under construction, in the yellow, but we also have the red. The red is the countries that we're looking to try to get to, the ones that we haven't had funding, we don't have the ability right now with the budgets that we have, or we don't have the new program that's going to be able to help us build in those locations. This is a good list. This is a list of our current completed. This does not have the yellow list of the ones that are currently under construction. So this is our completed list. We have about 3.8 megawatts and 21 million that we've invested. As you can see here, this is an interesting one, and Todd will go more into these numbers as we go forward. But you see the numbers going down as we go forward in time of the cost per watt. So we've actually been starting to see a trend in the right direction for cost per watt installed, which means that we can do more that are going to be cash flowing and more that are going to be viable for us as we move forward. Back to Mr. Evans.
All right. So let's look at some numbers here. So I told you I'd explain the high cost per kilowatt hour that we're paying. This is where we make up for it. So you can see on here, our first project, the Geneva project, subsidized, paid a little over 8 a watt for that installed. And then we start financing them ourselves. We have Abuja, Kigali, so on and so forth. We're at the point today where our cheapest system on the books right now is going to be in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, at about 383 a watt, I think. Those of you in the commercial and private sector have the benefit of, I know I've heard people say they're getting utility scale stuff as low as $1 a watt out in California. We pay a lot more because of our Division I burden, right? We have a lot of security. There could be cases where we have to fly American electricians out to do the install. So yeah, we have a high utility cost, but we're also paying high upfront for it too. So hopefully that translates to the private sector with lower utility costs and lower install costs. So in the same year, these are 2019 projects. I don't remember what the other dots are, but just the other side of that scale is Port Moresby. That's Papua New Guinea. It's the island you never think of above Australia. Very remote, very end-of-the-line place. So in the same year, we're paying under 4 a watt installed for a system and also above 6 a watt a system because of the environment it's got to go to. So we did a real simplified LCO, levelized cost of energy. This is probably not the true way to do it, right? But it's a little check we do internally. We take the cost of the system, the expected cost of the maintenance over its whole life, and divide it by the modeled power production that the system's supposed to have over a 25-year life. And in the case when we have actuals reporting back to us on old systems, we go and input that there too. So this is what we're paying per watt for all these systems. And this helps us decide where we think we can get a project going. We're at the point today where we're at about 18 cents a kilowatt hour for PV produced power, portfolio-wide. So now when we start moving into countries, building new embassies, building new consulates, we see an electric bill that's around 18 cents a kilowatt hour, we start thinking, hey, maybe we can do it, and we start digging in a little deeper. But back in the day, for that Geneva project, we paid over 50 cents a kilowatt hour for that. So we do another fun thing, right? We run that to what's the value of the electricity in these places. So again, we started out with Geneva, and we're under what the value of the utility. So the utility company's given us 83 cents a kilowatt hour there, and we're producing for 53, so great. Then there's a while when we weren't, we were over, right? Sometime in 2011, 2012, it got back under the line. So we're at the point today, portfolio-wide, where we are generating at 24 cents a kilowatt hour right now for power that we would be paying 34 cents a kilowatt hour is what we figure. So we're hoping that this chart continues to diverge, and this will keep going down. This is a little anomaly, we think, but we think this is going to keep going up, and it's going to become more and more the norm, and hopefully maybe move towards net zero or something in the future. So this is where we're at today. Right now, we spent 21 million-ish on our whole PV program to date. With everything on the books that's contracted or under construction right now, it's going to bring us up to about 40 million. If we stop the program right there, our whole portfolio would pay back by 2027. Let it run its life cycle, and we're at about 60 million in production value after payback for that system. So these systems are doing really good for us. Dave briefly mentioned the wind. So we're now starting to look at wind. So this is our Geneva of wind, right? Before we set up shop in Mauritania to build the embassy that's under construction right now, we set this meteorological station over there. This is called a SODAR, sonic detection and ranging. It measures wind speed and has a bunch of other atmospheric sensors associated with it. And we've had this thing all over the world. Our hope is that every time we buy a site, and there's a long real estate process that goes before a shovel hits the ground, we can deploy one of these things and just do a bench study before we come in. So it was in Istanbul, it was in Managua, it was in Curacao. It finally went to Nouakchott, and we got wind data back that looked good. So because of the data we got from the system, we're doing a 50 kW wind turbine there. Nouakchott actually means place of winds, I think, in ancient Berber. So good call on naming the city. The system's going to pay for itself in 12 years, we're thinking. And those are all the economics for it, of what we paid. So how are we paying for all this? Dave mentioned we have 3 main programs to pay for it. With the new construction and major renovations, it's built in. We've spent $11 million. For standalone projects that we're not really to come back and renovate anytime soon or overhaul, we've been able to come back and squeeze out $9 million in funds to do an add-on renewable project to those. But they're not throwing money at us. Even though I showed that chart before that shows how good these are doing economically, we're just not getting piles of money. So this is why we've been turning to ESPCs lately. And so far, through the ESPC process, almost 18 million so far. So I'm going to hand it off to Griff to talk about our ESPC program here.
All right, thank you, Todd.
Thanks.
And thank all of you for hanging in here and attending our session at the end of the day. I'm Bob Griffin. I'm the Director of Engineering, Procurement, and Construction for Lockheed Martin's energy business, if you will, and I also manage the energy services company for Lockheed, which is in the performance contracting business. I want to start this afternoon by saying, first of all, that we're very proud to be one of several energy services companies that are supporting the State Department through deploying renewables to our U.S. embassies overseas through energy savings performance contracts. So I want to do a little bit of audience interaction here. I'm going to ask you to look at this face. And I'm going to pick on you. Do I look angry? Do I look grumpy? Do I look upset? I always start my presentations off this way because I know I have this perpetual frown. Okay? But I can tell you, I'm very happy to be here, and we're very happy to be participating in this program. This face just happens to be a face that only a mother, 2 daughters, and my fiance knows is actually smiling. So I am smiling this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about ESPCs. So second part of audience participation here is, who knows what an ESPC is? Raise your hand, please. So a few folks. My goal this afternoon is not to give you, a deep dive into the definition and how they work, but I am going to hit, I'm a retired Air Force colonel, I'll hit the 30,000-foot level for you of how the projects actually work. So this is the definition off of the Department of Energy's Federal Energy Management Program website. And DOE is one of several federal agencies that offers ESPC contracts to federal customers. GSA offers them. The Army has a multiple award task order contract as well that you can do ESPCs through. The State Department happens to utilize FEMP's IDIQ vehicle, task order contract vehicle, and there are 16 ESCOs that hold that contract, and we are one of the 16 ESCOs. So rather than read this definition to you, let me just say we're talking about using other people's money. So it's getting a capital loan, third-party financing in order to build today energy efficiency improvements in your infrastructure and then pay back that capital loan and the debt servicing of that loan over the period of performance of a contract through the resultant energy savings and the O&M savings, the operations and maintenance savings associated with the installed measures. Again, I'm not going to dive deep here, but as an ESCO, what we're hired to do as a subject matter expert is we come into our customers and it's a design-build process. We'll do a preliminary assessment, which is a rough order of magnitude, basically proposal of what technically might work and what might it cost. And if that looks good to the customer, then we move into an investment grade audit, which is in ASHRAE level terms, a level 3 audit. And at the end of that process, a collaborative project development process with our customer, we develop a firm fixed price proposal of what we will build the project for and what we will charge to operate that project over the period of performance of the contract. And these can go out 25 years per the USC authority that allows federal agencies to enter into these agreements. A typical ESPC will deliver something around 15 to 35% energy savings as a result of the project, and up to 25% reduction in the operations and maintenance costs associated with installing improvements in the infrastructure. And most of them average a 10 to 15-year return on investment in terms of the capital costs and the payback of the capital costs. Again, we not only design the project, we install it, and then we operate it throughout the period of performance. And during that period of performance, we are guaranteeing to our customer energy savings. And any energy savings above what we've guaranteed is free savings to the customer. And if we do not meet our guarantee, then we are financially responsible for that delta, and we have to pay that. We do annual measurement and verification through metering, advanced metering and baselining, so that there's proof to the customer that we are meeting the guarantees and that the systems are operating as guaranteed. And we also do operations and maintenance of those systems. So we're installing some fairly high efficiency, high tech equipment, and we're not burdening the customer with the requirement to maintain and operate that equipment and then maybe not operate as designed. And we do that through the entire period of performance. And again, that is financed through the project. And I've been talking about financing. That financing is secured through competitive financial rates. So we go out to a minimum of 3 lending institutions in order to deliver to the government the best financing available. And I can tell you, in the last 5 years, that financing has ranged somewhere between 3 to 5%. So it's a fairly good climate. I've been talking about the payback a little bit, so let me use this model to demonstrate some concepts here. And I'll use the screen here I'll use it on the left since most of the audience is over here. So if you look at cost as the y-axis here and time as the x-axis, if today you're a customer, and I'll use some notional numbers here, let's say you're spending $100,000 a month on your utility bill. If you did nothing, then what would happen? Your energy costs would go up over time. That's the top part of this line here. Why would they go up? Well, because as a commodity, energy is going to get more expensive, and your infrastructure is going to continue to become less efficient and use more energy to operate. So we baseline what you're spending today, your historical energy costs. We come in with a project, and here at this blue arrows is the investment and the installation of the guaranteed savings. And let's say we're guaranteeing a 30% reduction in energy use. What you're going to do as a customer is you're going to continue to budget this amount of money in your O&M programs, in your utility account. So if you're spending $100,000 a day, you're going to continue to budget $100,000 a month, $100,000 a month plus escalation through the period of performance. But what you're going to do is, because we're guaranteeing 30% reduction, this yellow line and this dip right here represents going from these costs down to the blue costs, okay? The delta right here is you're now paying $70,000 a month to your utility, and you're paying $30,000 a month to the ESCO. That $30,000 a month is used to service the debt and to pay us to operate the project over the finance term. And this, like I said, the contract can go 25 years. If the savings are more than what we guaranteed, that's the free cash flow above here. And if they're not, again, we're financially responsible for that delta. And at the end of the project, because of these capital improvements, your energy costs have gone from this upper line to this lower line right here, and this is all free cash flow savings back to the customer. So that's a fairly simplistic explanation of how an ESPC works. So we'll talk about a project that we've executed for the State Department down at the U.S. Embassy in Managua, Nicaragua. Interesting project in that about 200,000 square feet of facilities and 9 buildings on a 60-acre compound down there. But what was really interesting was they averaged about 6 years of age. And the State Department has a fairly rigorous design standard for its facilities in terms of high performance building standards and energy efficiency. So you might think, what could you find in that newer facilities in order to improve and reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their cost of operations, increase resiliency, and make the embassy greener, which, by the way, were the strategic objectives of the State Department given to us in this project. Well, we were able to deploy almost a megawatt of solar, and it's the largest deployment of solar to date in a State Department. So if you remember a chart that Todd showed a few slides back, this is the largest deployment. And then a host of improvements to the infrastructure systems. We deployed variable refrigerant volume air conditioning systems to replace their split DX systems. We put in a new chiller that I'll talk about shortly, secondary transformers, and digital lighting and controls, as well as retro commissioning the existing infrastructure that was on site. One of the things that we're proud about this project on, and I think State Department is as well, is from the time the notice of opportunity hit the street, they went through the competitive down select process with the 16 ESCOs in order to choose Lockheed Martin. We developed the project in collaboration with the State Department, designed, constructed, and delivered it. We're talking 34 months. Now, that may seem like a long time, but for those of you who know ESPCs, this is the fastest ESPC ever executed on the current FEMP contract, especially for this large of a project. And you see in this photo right here a picture of the ground mount solar PV that we put in along with the inverters. That's about half of the just under megawatt of solar that was deployed. Talked about some of the energy conservation measures. Quickly hit the chiller here. What we found was they had two 325-ton chillers in place that were serving the load capacity of the compound. Their night load and their weekend load was about 150 tons. And so they were trying to throttle down those chillers, very inefficient, not good use of energy. We put in a brand new 210 chiller, water-cooled screw chiller, that is not only now handling the weekend and night loads, but it's also operating about 20% of the daytime on the operational load too. And it is paying for itself in less than 10 years. 6-year-old facilities, 6-year-old chillers in the original design. We improved the building automation systems on the EMS side and the BAS side. I mentioned we retro-commissioned. Pretty good deployment of LEDs. About 444 interior fixtures were installed in just under 1,800 interior and 444 exterior was the actual makeup of what we did. Between these ECMs and 22 secondary transformers, high harmonic, highly efficient transformers, we were able to reduce their consumption by 27%. 27% reduction in their utility bill as a result of deployment of these measures. Overhead view here of the site. Here's the ground mount that was installed. By the way, this area right here used to look like this area right here. And there was a lot of thought and care given to that on cutting down trees. Those trees were replaced in other areas on the U.S. Embassy compound. Here are 2 solar canopies that we constructed to make up the remainder of the megawatt of production. Secondary benefit of those canopies is it's pretty hot in Managua, and it provided sheltered parking space for the staff that works there. With the 27% on the energy conservation measures that we installed for the remaining load, we were able to reduce that by 37% with the deployment of this solar. So together, we guaranteed a 50% reduction on their load requirement, and we projected that we might be able to hit up to 54%. So this is a deep energy retrofit when I told you previously that most ESPCs deliver something in the order of magnitude of 15 to 35% energy savings. So in summary, this project cost just under $15 million to build. It's about $10 million worth of O&M expenses over the period of performance. It is a 25-year contract. It's going to save the State Department $36 million in utility costs over the term of that contract by delivering about 2.5 megawatt hours a year of savings. And as I mentioned, about a 54% reduction, we think. We're 13 months into operation. We're about to deliver our first annual measurement verification report, and we are trending somewhere between 51 and 54%, having guaranteed 50. So it's a very good news story. The other piece that's, I think, encouraging is there's a second phase that we're developing right now to deploy additional solar on site. We had looked at wind, and even though wind blows pretty good down in Nicaragua, it just wasn't sustainable for this particular site. But we're going to deploy, hopefully, some additional solar combined with storage and a microgrid in order to potentially take this U.S. Embassy 95% off the grid. And if we can get the peak generator portion of this project working, we can actually achieve net zero for the project. And why is that important to the State Department? It's about access to clean, reliable energy. And right now they're 100% dependent on private utility, either in Nicaragua. the fuel source of which comes from Venezuela. So there's a strategic side to this project as well as a green side of the project. And the photo here is from the groundbreaking with Ambassador Powers back in March of 2013, and it's or 14, I mean. And I'm going to share a quote that she put out, and not read it to you, but I think she was very proud of this project in that, and it's been mentioned by our State Department colleagues here. You know, the embassies try to be a good neighbor in the countries that they operate in, and not only were they able to achieve their objectives with this project of making the embassy more sustainable and more green, but it's leadership in the country itself. Nicaragua has about 5,800 megawatt capacity for green power, and they're generating less than 10% of that today. This is a significant project in that country in terms of what the United States is willing to do as a partner operating there. And we look forward to doing the second phase on this project and make it even greener than it is today. So that concludes I think what we have for you this afternoon, and we've got 20 minutes here for questions and answers. We would just ask if you come to the mic to ask your questions.
Yeah, they're videotaping it, so
Please.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Thanks for a great presentation. I can see why your face smiling, because when you get 18 months visibility study, executed ESPC project, I never heard about it.
It's
So
pretty unique.
now, under the existing ESPC guideline published in 2008, the risk factors is kind of, we share the risk between the governments and the ESCO. Overseas, I'm not sure how does this work with the risk factor there, especially act of God, terrorist, stuff like that. Can you explain to me a little bit?
Sure, I can comment, and then Dave can as well, I think. There are force majeure provisions in the IDIQ, if that means to anybody, but acts of God, those sorts of things that do protect both the government and the ESCO in terms of the installed measures and who addresses those costs if something happens during the period of performance. There are other aspects or risks that are shared between the government and the ESCO as well, one of which is the price of utility costs and how you're baselining that over the period of performance, and whether or not that utility cost actually escalates at that rate or doesn't escalate at that rate. And there are provisions within the contract that allow the government to revisit that, and if necessary in the future, address that in terms of the contract through a buyout or other kinds of provisions like that. I mean, does that answer your question? Okay. I mean, I can tell you that we are modeling a project right now for the embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, that we were also selected for. That has a whole
Risky there.
That has a whole different set of risk propositions associated with trying to do that project. And you know, I think we have a great partnership between the government and the ESCO here in trying to share those risks and make a project work. Do you have anything to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, and one of the things that we do is a lot of analytics on the back end for historic data and historic information to be able to mitigate the risk and to identify who should be taking those risks. So one thing that we look at is currency. So usually we're paying the local utility bill in the local currency. So we've actually removed that risk from the ESCO and brought that back onto the State Department, since we're still, you know, all the money that goes to Nicaragua, for this example, goes in US dollars. So we take on that risk and we take on that potential for the fluctuation in the currency. But for, like Bob mentioned, the escalation of the utility, we went 20, 30 years back and looked at all of the rates and the spikes and the ups and downs to be able to nail down an escalation rate that we were all comfortable with, both on the contractor side as well as the government side, so that we can fix those numbers and then they get slid to the side and they're part of the contract, and then we can focus on other parts of risk like operations and maintenance, availability of the utility, getting people in and out of the country. So we do a complete risk matrix. We do a lot of back-end analytics to make sure that we're mitigating it as much as we can.
That's your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm curious if any of these projects, if you've seen any indication of ripple effect to the host countries themselves. These seem to be very trend-setting, you know, particularly in some of these countries where this would be revolutionary. And I'm curious, either through active outreach or just by being there, did you see any impact?
Yeah, I'll do the first part. So we do try, like for instance, when we set up the SODAR, and when we do these real estate assessments, we routinely reach out to local universities, local government, and let them know we're coming, let them know what we're trying to do, in the hopes that that would spur local labor or local training. For instance, in Mauritania, for instance, comes to mind. We went there, we met with the local university. They had little 5 kW wind turbines going, but we'd rather have them maintain our stuff than have to fly Americans out, right? So we'll see, only time will tell. We'll see what happens if they come out and they step up and they know they have a customer there, if they'll come and do that. I can't think of any specific examples, maybe you do, of where.
One thing that we did was we studied in Istanbul. So we were told Istanbul's windy here, come out and study. So we did, and we actually didn't find the numbers that we really needed for a wind turbine, but all the numbers that we found, we shared with the local university, because the way that the SODAR works is it's very specific, and wind is very specific to the location. So it was something that, they were doing wind analytics with everything from the airport, which was 30 miles outside of town, versus where we were in the city, being able to give them this data so that they could then correlate between the two and hopefully spur more investment. So we are always engaging with the local community through our public affairs, through universities and local contractors. I mean, most of the PV systems, the standalone PV systems, are done by local contractors that are in country and being able to showcase their own capability for the State Department and to be able to spur their investment as well. And I know in Managua, whenever you were there for the groundbreaking, it was critical that they brought in folks that were local for demonstrating the ESPC.
And we had great participation from the local university, schools, and government officials who took a lot of interest in this project.
Hi, my question is for Bob.
Yes.
You mentioned about M&V for guaranteeing savings in ESPCs.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about other ways of guaranteeing savings, and if there are any?
Other means of guaranteeing
Yes.
savings outside of an ESPC?
Measurement and verification. Is
Well-
that the only way to do it?
Outside of M&V?
Yeah. No, are there any other ways outside of M&V?
I'd have to think about that. Within an ESPC itself or in other
Yes.
kinds of contracting vehicle? Well, yeah, first of all, good point made over here. The M&V is required on the contract. And there's 4 different protocols for how the M&V is actually conducted. Sometimes it's just stipulated. And what that means is you have a light fixture that's replacing an old light fixture. You know what the watt usage was on the old light fixture. You know what the watt usage is on the new light fixture. What's the delta savings? You agree to that. You don't measure and verify it. Most of the savings for most customers are metered. Okay, so we're actually putting data loggers on installed equipment, and we're proving that it's operating the way it's supposed to. I don't know that I would, within a performance contract, and the requirements of the performance contract, there is enhanced M&V, there are other things that can be done, but it all comes down to M&V because the contract requires it. I'm not sure how to answer your question otherwise. Is there something you're thinking in terms of an alternative?
I was actually, somebody asked me this question in actually an interview, and I couldn't answer it. So I was very curious to know the answer to it, because I do understand EM&V is, and that's what I answered, that's the best way to do it. But you are guaranteeing them that this is how much you're going to save. But
Yes.
after the installation, you are actually metering it. But how do you, so an engineer is doing an analysis that you're going to save 1,000 megawatts.
Right.
And then you are metering it to
Right.
make sure that they're saving. So how do you make sure that it's actually going to be 1,000 megawatt hours?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into the analytics. So one of the things you have to look at, for instance, is what's the consumption today? You saw the baseline. And does that change over the period of performance? Because the mission may change. The profile loading of personnel in the buildings may change. The actual activity inside those buildings could increase the consumption curve so that your utility bill doesn't actually show savings, but we can prove on the energy consumption side through metering that you actually have achieved that savings. That's an example for you of how this M&V is done in order to show the client that the ESCO is not pulling the wool over their eyes, that we actually are delivering on what we promised and guaranteed. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious, when you miss your savings target, what the process is, if it's complicated by maybe the remoteness or the travel burden for some of these locations, how much it differs from just a domestic ESCO ESPC project, and the level of cooperation you get from the client.
Sure,
in this
so
case,
I'll
State
address the
Department.
front end of it.
Sure.
We're about to do the annual report. We'll provide our analytics of how the project has performed. By the way, we've been delivering one every quarter as well. So the trend data is already there. If we have a shortfall, the first payment due from the State Department to us, to Lockheed Martin, which actually comes to the third party to service the capital and the debt on that and pay our O&M expenses, it doesn't get paid until we have an agreement between the agencies on the savings. Right. So if we guaranteed, $100,000 in savings and we only deliver $90,000 in savings, they will decrement the payment due to us by $10,000. I mean, that's really how it fleshes out. Now, there is a dialogue between the ESCO and the customer to arrive at an agreement that there truly was a $10,000 shortfall, i.e., some of the things I just talked about earlier. There's no change in terms of the baseline operations, the use of the equipment, how the equipment was operated. But I mean, it's a collaborative environment, but it's also one that has strict controls on it in order to protect the government and protect the ESCO. Because I can tell you in the past, before the current contract came out with FEMP, M&V was not as rigorous as it is now. And I think the clients are very much protected now in terms of the ESCO having to prove savings to them before payments are actually made to us. I mean, do you want to add to that, Dave?
Right, and you actually touched on something that is difficult for us because we can't actually provide the data to the contractor from site because we're regulated for what we connect to the internet and what we can monitor, what we can't monitor. So from us, it becomes a challenge to be able to gather the data. So we're gathering our data from our end. They have systems that they gather data that then they have to go out and retrieve every year in order to be able to start correlating that. But I think back to the first question, which was risk. So the contractor mitigates that risk of not meeting that number by guaranteeing more than what they think they can give us. So in this particular number with Managua, they guaranteed us 50%. They projected to actually being able to save us 54. So that difference in those two numbers is actually direct savings to the federal government to manage their risk in not meeting the contract requirements.
Definitely harder in an area like Managua or Kabul, Afghanistan to do that. And so there's a set of procedures and a relationship between us and the client on how we gather that data and how we look at that data together. But we build those costs into the plan, by the way. And we're counting on a certain number of visits out there to not only do the measurement verification, but to operate and maintain the equipment or repair and replacement. Because if we're guaranteeing a piece of equipment is going to deliver X number % reduction, what happens when the piece of equipment fails outside the manufacturer's warranty within the life cycle of the project? I have to replace it. Did that answer your question, sir? Okay.
So I have two questions. One on that project, what was the utility rate, and was it diesel-powered generation, or was it electricity from a local utility?
It's electricity from a local utility and 27 cents a kilowatt hour.
27, yeah.
All right. So the other question is for the Department of State. Are you actively pursuing ways to reduce plug loads in your buildings? Because in my work, plug loads is a huge percentage of the energy consumption, and when you can save there, you can save on PV.
Yeah, so we do manage a lot of what goes into our facilities as far as the equipment. One thing that we're actually introducing into our 2016 standards, which we are technically in 2016, they'll come out the very beginning of the year, is control of plugs, the convenience receptacles and receptacles in open office spaces with occupancy sensors. So that's a California Energy Code requirement for 50% to be controlled. So it is something that we are further looking for. And the nice thing with our capital building program, again, we're getting about $2.4 billion a year to build new buildings. We can, every time we make a change like that, we affect from there forward all of our facilities. So it does become part of what we do on the underlying, but yeah, we're looking at every single piece of equipment to go into our facilities to make them as efficient as possible, because we have a lot of security requirements that make us very inefficient on the back end of that. So we have to balance between the two and make sure we have safe and functional facilities.
And I can tell you for this project, in the preliminary assessment, plug load management was one of the ECMs that we looked at, along with some other behavior management.
Behavior management.
ECMs, which are very, by the way, are very hard to measure and verify and control. And in the case of this embassy, they had already decided to deploy some of that plug load management, so it did not become an ECM in the project.
Hi, do you have any additional physical security requirements due to the expanded infrastructure footprint that the solar arrays cause? Do you have to worry about theft?
Like, are we now protecting them because they are now our energy source?
Are you protecting them, you know, before you, I'm not familiar with the security of the Department of State Embassy. I assume there's a fenced area around the building, but your solar arrays may be outside that fenced area.
Yeah, well, mostly on the staff parking, so yeah, they're mostly on the staff parking lot outside of our protected perimeter. But we don't really protect them in the way, because we always assume the generator, the diesel generators, is the fallback for our life safety and emergency operations.
So we are conscious of the financial aspect of the installation, so we don't necessarily look to add things to that. So, you know, looking at security of an embassy, it's like an onion. The deeper you get, the harder it is to affect change. So oftentimes these are towards the outside. They're not, again, as Todd said, they're not required to be protected as the generators are, but we still control them. I mean, we don't have any that we're doing off-site. We don't have any that, you know, we're not buying wrecks. We're not doing anything like that. So we do maintain control of everything. And with just the general security we have around our site, we tend to keep things safe. It hasn't been a problem.
It hasn't been a problem. Okay.
No.
And now, the systems were installed meeting setback criteria.
Yes.
And we're not building infrastructure close to the perimeters of the embassy that allows or helps or aids someone to get onto the facility with an elevated structure. You know, there's a setback criteria that's made.
And from another security aspect, you know, when we started the capital security program from the bombings in Tanzania, we have removed ourselves as an easy target, if you will. So you see there's a lot of issues going around. We've actually been able to remove ourselves from being an easy target to things like that for security. And if we are targeted, we do keep that way to the outside. So we are building very safe, very functional facilities whenever we do build a facility.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is related to financing as it relates to the payback periods. So a lot of those had fairly long payback periods, and in terms of the ESPC program, theoretically it can go up to 25 years, but
Correct.
How does that affect your financing and the ability to get financing and the rates when you start getting into all of that? Are there any difficulties, and how have you addressed that?
I mean, there's a set of banks out there who work in this industry, and there's criteria they apply to these projects. It's all about the customer and the ESCO and other risk parameters that they're assessing. But you might be encouraged to know that there are banks willing to finance an ESPC in Kabul, Afghanistan, as an example. And they were willing to do that on this project. And this project had an interest rate of just north of 3%.
Yeah,
and that was a function of, first of all, State Department as a client and honoring its debt to the investor, okay? And quite frankly, we are an investment grade company, Lockheed Martin. And so that you won't find that with a lot of ESCOs in the industry. And so there's a risk position assigned in terms of the bank looking at us and the performance of the project, not only in the installation, but the operation of the project over that term. The other thing they look at, and you're making the point, is how long does it take to pay me back? Okay? And this is a 23.5-year project, so there's a risk element associated with that. But the banks will, you know, add some quarter point, half point a point to the interest rate in order to address that risk in the financing that they deliver. I think we have less than a minute. One more question.
Don't want to stand in front of cocktails, but Todd, question for you real quick. Where does renewable potential fall in the list of priorities for site selection for the state?
It really, I wish it did, but it didn't. Usually the things that take priority are security-driven things. Big thing that always comes up, do we have 2 roads that can get on and off the site in an emergency? Is this a location that can be served by power the way we need to, or water services the way we need to? So it usually falls lower on the list. And typically most sites within the same city are going to be relatively the same for us. But yeah, it's not the top ranked thing. I wish I could say we're doing this site because that's the best for my PV generation. There's usually other things that'll trump me for security.
Great.
And we're the only thing between you and happy hour, so I think that concludes our
Thank you
session.
so much.
Thank you.